the Vice Lords, warriors of the streets, by ℌ𝔞𝔫𝔦𝣣.
That's bad, man. That is bad. It ain't never done. That's been never done on a record before. That's bad, brother. That is bad. Believe me. Believe me. That's bad. Believe me.
Came for the way my DJ cut it. DJ cut it. DJ cut it.
We interrupt our program to bring you
Chapter 1, Vice Lord Development. Before beginning our discussion of the Vice Lord's social and cultural system, it would be useful to look at the origin and subsequent growth of the groups. The Vice Lords originated and have become differentiated and elaborated in an extremely short time. The facts presented in later chapters will make more sense if viewed against the background of Vice Lord development. The description in this chapter is not presented as historical fact. My aim is not to describe what happened, but what Vice Lords believe happened. For these beliefs affect Vice Lord behavior in the present. The data were gathered from a number of informants, and their accounts did not always completely correspond. Nevertheless, there was a general agreement about broad lines of development. It is generally stated that the Vice Lord Nation, referred to by Vice Lords as a club, not a gang, originated in 1958 in what is usually called Charlietown, the Illinois State Training School for Boys at St. Charles, Illinois. In St. Charles, the inmates live in what are called cottages. The Vice Lords began in Harding Cottage, which housed the toughest boys in the institution. The club was started in the Lawndale area of Chicago in the fall of 1958, following the release of several members. Lawndale has long been a breeding ground for delinquent groups, primarily organized for fighting. Even before the area became predominantly black, Polish, and Jewish groups in Lawndale engaged in fierce gang fighting. After the area changed from white to black, the fighting gang pattern was continued by black groups. One of the early black fighting gangs in Lawndale was called the Clovers. At the time the Vice Lords first returned to Chicago from St. Charles, the Clovers were breaking up. Its members were getting older, approaching 20. The group came under increasingly heavy pressure from a newer club called the Egyptian Cobras. The Cobras had originally started in the Maxwell Street open market area of Chicago's near west side, known as Jewtown. Later, a bunch of the Cobras was initiated in a part of the west side's ghetto to the west of the Clovers called K-Town, because all the street names begin with K, and therefore this particular branch was called the K-Town Cobras. The K-Town Cobras soon increased in power and came into conflict with the older, more established Clovers, the boy living in the Clovers neighborhood, who later became an important member of the Vice Lords, tells the following story about the gang war between the Cobras and the Clovers. See, there was this humbug between the Clovers and the Egyptian Cobras. A boy got killed in that humbug. A Clover, a stud named Walker, got his head burned off with a shotgun, Jack. See, the Clovers, they was pretty old then. They had been out a long time, and they had their name. But the Cobras had just come out that summer, 1957, in K-Town, and they started to fight the Clovers. The Clovers, they were established. They had their reputation. Now, if the Cobras had fought them a couple of years before, they couldn't have done nothing with them. By then, all the Clovers were old and tired. So the Cobras hurt them. And that's when the Cobras first got their name in the fall of 1958. The members of the newly created Vice Lords moved into the section of the Clovers' old neighborhood, vacated during the decline in Clover power. At this point, there is a major divergence between accounts. One informant stated that many of the original members of the Vice Lords had previously belonged to a group known as the Imperial Chaplains, located to the east of the Clovers. When the members of the Vice Lords returned to Chicago, they decided to start their own branch of Imperials, called the Imperial Vice Lords. The Imperial Vice Lords did not remain a branch for long. Friction developed between the two groups, and fighting broke out at a party at which both were present. Although the Lords were outnumbered, they won the fight, injuring several Imperials in the process. This established the Vice Lords as a group completely independent of the Imperials. And from then on, the club was known as the Conservative Vice Lord Nation. Another informant told a different story. He said that the Vice Lords never were a part of the Imperial Chaplains. When the members of the Lords returned to Lawndale from St. Charles, they decided to continue the group as a small club organized for social purposes, sponsoring parties purposes. The original Lords had been members of many different fighting gangs: the Apaches, the Thunderbirds, the Golden Hawks, the Vampires, and the Imperial Chaplains. At first, the club's activities consisted solely of giving parties and hanging together. Slowly, the groups grew until almost inevitably fighting developed, with both the Cobras to the west in K-Town and the Imperial Chaplains to the east. It is my feeling that this later version is probably closer to the actual fact, since 1, it is corroborated by other accounts, and 2, the informant who gave the account actually took part in this period of the group's development. The earlier version came from a Vice Lord who was in St. Charles during this time, and who was repeating stories told to him. The first big jump in Vice Lord membership came from an alliance with the club called the El Commandos. The El Commandos was later completely absorbed by the Vice Lords. Like the early Vice Lords, the El Commandos was primarily a social rather than a fighting club. Caveman, one of the original Lords from St. Charles, and reputed by some to be the actual founder of the club, had previously been a member of the El Commandos. When he returned to Lawndale, the alliance was made between the two groups. At first, Caveman's mother allowed the club to use the basement of her house for meetings and parties. But after several fights, the group was forced to give its parties in small rented halls and other basements. At parties such as these, the group giving the affair furnishes something to drink, often a weak punch, and charges a small admission fee of 25 or 50 cents. The group usually makes a small amount of money, which is used to finance future parties. Social groups organized by a small group of friends to give parties are common in the black ghettos of Chicago. and most do not develop into large federations of street corner groups. That the vice lords developed in this direction can, I feel, be attributed to the power vacuum created by the decline of the Clovers. As the Cobras to the west and the imperial chaplains to the east grew in strength, pressure was exerted on unorganized boys living in the Clovers' territory. This pressure consisted of shakedowns, demands that non-affiliated individuals join one of the two groups, attempts to monopolize girls in the neighborhood, and fights and threats against the unorganized boys. It was probably inevitable that some group would become the rallying point for resistance against this pressure. The vice lords became the rallying point following two incidents. The first began at a dance at which both vice lords and cobras were present. During the course of the evening, a vice lord and a cobra argued over a girl. At the time, the argument was considered inconsequential, but later it took on major importance. Following the dance, the vice lords went to a restaurant and by chance met a group of cobras. The vice lords were wearing their special club capes, and each boy had an earring in one ear. Say, man, what's up with that gold earring you got in your left ear? The curiosity of the cobras was aroused. What's up with them hats? And when the vice lords were asked why they dressed in this manner, they explained it was the uniform of their new club. At first, it was suggested that the vice lords merge with them, but this offer was refused, and the cobras decided to fight. The excuse the cobras used was the argument that had taken place at the dance. The cobra who had first been involved recognized the vice lord he had argued with and began to insult him. The vice lord, a boy named Bird, who later became Supreme War Counselor, hit the cobra with the chair, which started a fight between the two groups. The vice lords claimed that the cobras were not able to win, which may or may not be true. In any case, the vice lords claimed that they had evenly matched the cobras, was the story spread throughout the neighborhood. The second incident took place at a dance given by the imperial chaplains. Following is a vice lord's account of this incident. There was only a few of us at this dance, and the Imperials, they jumped on us for something. And this is when we first started fighting them. Like I said, there wasn't very many of us, but we made such a good fight at this showing that our name went out. See, a lot of the Imperials got hurt, and there was just us few. That's where we got our rep from. You know, when we're outnumbered and we're still whooping ass. After these incidents, more individuals in the neighborhood joined the group, and it grew to about 25 members. The original members still felt, however, that the club should remain primarily a social group. Their feelings began to change after the Cobras delivered a threatening message that the lords had only one more night to live. Soon after, when several imperial chaplains broke into the basement of Caveman's house, still used for club meetings, tore the furniture apart, and set fire to the basement, many of the vice lords decided that some kind of retaliation was necessary. A meeting was called to decide on the course of action. While many members did not feel the club was strong enough to fight either the imperial chaplains or the Cobras, a few of the more influential leaders had decided that the group could no longer remain simply a social club. According to one of the lords present at this meeting, everybody said, man, what can we do against clubs as large as the Cobras and the Imperials? So Bird said, well, one thing we can do is when we get ready to come down on any club, we send 20 guys home, tell them to go anywhere, watch TV. The 5 of us will come down with guns. And after we shoot up a couple of studs, we'll go back to our neighborhood and go home. We won't stay there and fight, we'll just go home, period. And when they come back through our neighborhood, they won't find nothing. We got to stop them from hurting us. We can't go on like this. So that's what we decided to do. At this point in the Vice Lord's development, there was no institutionalized formal organization. There were no formal leadership positions and no formally recognized cleavages within the group. However, there were recognized leaders whose power stemmed from personal charisma. These leaders recognized that if the Vice Lords were to withstand both the Cobras and the Imperial chaplains, they would have to increase their membership, for only with the larger group they could, 1, control their neighborhood and thus protect themselves from surprise attacks, and 2, more evenly match their opponents in gang fighting encounters. The Vice Lords approached the task of recruiting new members in several different ways. Both the non-affiliated boys and other existing small clubs were potential sources of new members, but each posed different problems in recruitment. The methods used to recruit non-affiliated boys were explained to me as follows. What we did a survey of the neighborhood. We found out that there was fellas that was not accepted by any club for one reason or another. Maybe a guy was disliked because he had jumped on somebody, or because he wouldn't join some club. So we approached him from a different angle. First, instead of trying to scare him into becoming a part of our group, we tried to gain his friendship. Say, you want to join our gang, man? I don't want to join no gang, man. Oh, you ain't got no choice, brother. You gonna join this gang.
He don't want to join.
Is that right? Man, get over here, man. How much money you got for the gang?
Huh?
Check your pocket. Run your pockets.
I ain't got no money, man.
Check his back pocket, man. See, what a lot of clubs didn't realize is that if a guy's your friend, he'll automatically be with you in a humbug. But what they would come through with, you either join our club or we'll do this or we'll do that. We didn't do that. We said, well, the Imperials are falling down on us. The Cobras are falling down on us. We got to do something about this, man. We can't keep being abused by these clubs. What we gonna do? We gonna get together and look out for our hoods. Now see, by him being tight with us, when the Cobras or the Imperials fall down on us, they gonna fall down on him too. By making him our friend automatically, we make him the enemy of the other group. He only have one support, and that's to stay within the body that's with him. Different tactics were necessary in recruiting new members from the smaller clubs located in various West Side neighborhoods. Many of these clubs were engaged in gang wars with stronger rivals. The Vice Lords supported these groups in their wars, and in return, these clubs became subgroups of the Vice Lords. In other instances, the Vice Lords entered alliances with groups which were also under pressure from the Cobras and the Imperials, and slowly, these groups began to consider themselves Vice Lords. According to my informants, a club called the Spanish Counts, with about 20 to 25, was absorbed into the Vice Lords in this manner. Although this club was small, several Spanish Counts had well-known gang fighting reputations, and the Vice Lords' prestige was enhanced by the addition of these members. Following the alliance with the Spanish counts, the vice lords began a systematic attack on a club called the Imperial Knights, a group located between the imperial chaplains and the Cobras. While this group had previously refused all overtures for an alliance with the vice lords, the combined strength of the Spanish counts and the vice lords was now too great for them. And finally, after a prolonged period of gang warfare, they agreed to become vice lords. Possibly, these various clubs would not have successfully merged if it had not been for the intensified pressure from both the Cobras and Imperials. Both these groups renewed their threats to crush the vice lords and began an all-out attack. By this time, it was too late. The addition of new members gave the vice lords added strength and increased the prestige of the group, continued to bring in new members, many with established gang fighting reputations. In talking about this stage in the club's development, one of my informants gave the following account, which reads something like the catalog of warriors in the Iliad. From the Imperial Knights, we got guys like Fresh Up Freddy, Wade, Lil Bull, Polecat, Napoleon, Goat, Duck. From the Clovers, we got Cherokee, Prince, Gigi, Peanut, Hawk, and the Satisfier. From the Comancheros came Sonny Boy Brown, Willie B, Binky, and from the Braves came Carlos, Zenith, and Blue Goose. Now all of these guys had reputations all around the West Side, and when other guys got together, you can hear them talk about it. You could walk past because they didn't know whether you was a part of the vice lords or not, and you'd hear them say, "Those vice lords got some terrible guys in their group. You're gonna have to put up some strong resistance to stop them." Even with this increase in strength, however, the vice lords would have been at a definite disadvantage if the Cobras and the Imperials had been able to cooperate successfully. During a battle with the vice lords, however, the brother of Cobra's president was accidentally shot by an Imperial, and a gang war between the Cobras and the Imperials resulted. This placed the vice lords in an advantageous position, since the Cobras now blamed the vice lord attacks on the Imperials, while the Imperials blamed them on the Cobras. In 1962, the Imperials began to break up, and from then on were less of a threat to the vice lords. In contrast, the war with the Cobras intensified, and in 1961 and 1962 flared out in numerous battles in which members of both clubs were killed. This is how a vice lord describes one of the early battles in the war with the Cobras. One night we really found out whether or not we was ready. Almost every Cobra from the south side, down Jewtown Way, K-Town, and some of the King Cobras from the north side all came over to the YMCA. We was in the gym playing ball. There was about 50 of us in there. They had gave what is called a bunking party. All the fellas would come over, play sports, eat, and at night they'd lock the doors and you'd sleep there. So both the Cobras and our fellas was there. And Lil Herc from our club and Lil Herc in the Cobras, they got to arguing about something that happened between them and a broad. So Herc said, "Well, man, I don't want to see all the fellas fighting. So what we'll do, me and you just go." So they took off their shirts and they got ready to humbug. But Crazy Horse, they president, he came over and said, "No, If one Cobra fight, we all fight. Cobra!
Nah,
Go!
Vice Lord. I don't give a fuck how many of them is.
Over here, Lord.
But them motherfuckers wanted to. Rico!
Come on, Lord.
Rico! Come over here,
Yo,
man.
oh, what, motherfucker? You don't know this is Cobra.
What?
Hey! Hey, stop fighting! Hey! Stop fighting!
And Rico, he was in there at the time. Rico was one of the original 7 in the Lords. So when the fight starts, Rico and Crazy Horse took over the picture. And everybody stopped just watching them, more or less. But when the real force of the Cobras came up from downstairs to fight, that's when the humbug really broke out.
Yo, light him up, horse. Go! What? Yeah, you didn't know Vice
Come
Lord.
on, Lord.
Yeah, well, that's Crazy Horse, motherfucker.
Rico, Vice Lord.
Yo, that's Crazy Horse. One earring wearing motherfucker.
See, we got the best of that fight. Because really, the Cobras that had their guns was stuck outside because the door was locked and they couldn't get in. Following the growth in the Vice Lord's membership, there was a corresponding institutionalization in the organization. 1. Groups of Vice Lords from various parts of the West Side formed into distinct subgroups called branches, which were joined in a loosely knit federation. 2. Within each branch, leadership became institutionalized in specific positions. 3. Age categories were set up, which cross-cut the branches. And 4. Within branches, particular groups were given specific duties. We have already mentioned that many of the smaller clubs, which the Vice Lords absorbed, became distinct branches. In other instances, groups of Vice Lords occupying neighborhoods some distance from the club's core territory also became separate branches. Following the establishment of branches, the original group, centered at 16th and Lawndale, became known as the City Lords, since they controlled that portion of the club's territory, called Vice Lord City. Other important branches were the Monroe Lords on Monroe Street, the Maypole Lords on Maypole Avenue, the California Lords, the Sacramento Lords, the Fifth Avenue Lords, and the Albany Lords. Within each branch, and for the club as a whole, leadership was institutionalized in positions. The development was a conscious response by the Vice Lords to the high probability that particular leaders would be arrested. The police approach to the problems posed by fighting clubs is to jail the leaders in hopes that the group will then dissolve. The Vice Lords solved this problem by developing leadership positions which provided an effective mechanism for replacing leaders jailed by the police. With the Vice Lords' newly gained size, there were many boys with leadership ability, and when a particular leader was arrested, another individual was chosen to occupy the vacated position. Each branch was subdivided into age groups called seniors, juniors, and midgets. In some branches, there were even pee-wee Vice Lords. Many of these formed particular subgroups within branches, each electing their own set of officers. In other instances, these were social categories rather than functional groups. The age criteria of these groupings varied from branch to branch, and in any case, were never completely rigid. Branches were further subdivided into what I call cliques, some of which were entrusted with particular responsibilities. These groups were composed of a small number of individuals who hung together. An example of a clique entrusted with a specific responsibility is the Spy Patrol. This group never took part in gang fighting, but watched other clubs' activities and reported what they saw to the president of the city lords. At the time I did my research, the spy patrol was no longer functioning, and my informants were not able to give more specific details about this group. In 1962, the war with the Cobras reached its peak and then began to wane. This was due to a variety of factors. The YMCA, though its detached worker program was successful in reaching leaders of both the Vice Lords and the Cobras, and detached workers were often able to head off gang fights. Further, black nationalism began to influence the boys in each group, and this acted as a check on gang fighting. According to several informants, after the sniper killing of a black high school student in South Lawndale, a predominantly Polish neighborhood, both Vice Lords and Cobras united in retaliatory raids. Following is a Vice Lord's account of this particular incident. What happened? This guy was coming from school and he was shot and killed. It was in a gray hood, white neighborhood. There was mostly Polish living over there. I guess they killed him because he was a Negro. He wasn't doing nothing, just walking down the street, coming from school with two other studs. And the man didn't know who did it. Anyway, he say he didn't. I guess it could have been anybody in the hood. And when this happened, well, I don't know just exactly how it was, but everybody just thought the same way. The Lords decided to go on over there. And some kind of way, we ended up with the Cobras too. It was just that everybody was out there, all the groups on the west side. And we went through the high school over there and the neighborhood every day and every night after that. And we dusted everybody we saw, Jack. Tearing up property. We turned over cars. We did everything. You know, before that, anytime we went over there in South Lawndale, we almost always get dusted or maybe even killed. But now they think twice, especially the older people, because they have more at stake. Now, you get some young studs. They might do it. You always got some fools anywhere you go that don't care really. But they'll think twice before they do it now. And that's why I say, like Malcolm X, violence sometimes serves its purpose. However, fighting between the Vice Lords and Cobras continued to flare up intermittently. And even during the time of my field work, fights between the groups of the two clubs still occurred. After 1962, definite signs of stress in the Vice Lord organization began to show. During this time, there were several feuds between various subgroups within the Vice Lord Federation. Some of these feuds were between branches, while others were between individuals competing for leadership of a particular branch. Following the imprisonment of many of the older boys who had been important leaders in the club's early days, the solidarity of the Vice Lords Federation weakened even further. There was little communication between branches, and many branch leaders did not even know one another. Further, the original branch, the City Lords, became divided into what were called sections. These sections were cliques, which had developed into sub-branches. Each section had a different name and set of officers. One section, called the St. Louis Lords, tried to gain even more autonomy from the City Lords by changing their name from Conservative Vice Lords to Mighty Vice Lords, and even went so far as to start their own female auxiliary, known as the Supreme Queens. All girls connected with the club had previously been called Vice Ladies. Sometime during 1963, the Imperial Chaplains completely broke up, and a short time later, a new club called the Roman Saints was formed in a part of the Imperial's old neighborhood. It was not long before various branches of the Vice Lords became involved in gang fights with this new group. However, the fighting between the Vice Lords and the Roman Saints was never as intense as that between the Vice Lords and Cobras, although intermittent conflicts with the Roman Saints continued to the time of my field work. In the summer of 1966, there was a new development in the Vice Lords organization. This was brought about by several circumstances. First, the jail terms of many of the original leaders terminated. These individuals were no longer boys, but ranged in age from about 23 to 26. Rather than give up their gang membership, they decided to stay in the group. They also brought new members, other men their age, into the Vice Lords. Second, the Blackstone Rangers, a fighting club located on the south side, began to receive newspaper publicity due to a gang war with the Devil's Disciples. In fact, one of Chicago's daily newspapers ran a week-long series on this group. In this series, it was stated that the Blackstone Rangers were perhaps the toughest, best organized gang Chicago had ever seen for some time. In reaction to this series, I heard comments from the Vice Lords about how the group was falling apart, how they used to have an organization, but it was going downhill. Finally, after the riots, which occurred on the West Side in the summer of 1966, the feelings of many Vice Lords turned away from black nationalism. I was told that some black nationalist groups had made promises to the Vice Lords that were not kept. At this time was also an increase in hostile incidents between the groups of Vice Lords and Roman Saints and Cobras. A meeting was called to discuss the future of the club. Although I was not present, I was told later that Bull, who was a member of a militant black nationalist organization, had spoken out against resumption of gang fighting. He felt that all the clubs on the West Side should stop fighting among themselves and unite against the whites. Others thought that the club's first responsibility was to protect its own members. I was told that in answer to Bull, another Vice Lord said, "The Cobras may be my brothers, but if one of them motherfuckers jump on me, I'll bust a cap in his ass." The overwhelming number of Vice Lords felt that the group should reorganize to protect themselves and their neighborhoods from hostile clubs and to reestablish the reputation lost to the Blackstone Rangers. According to my informant, Bull might have been jumped on for his views had he not left the meeting early. The decision was made to reorganize the club, and the responsibility for working out the details was given to a group composed of representatives from each branch, along with the older individuals that had just been released from prison. The most important element in the new organizational scheme, which resulted from the discussions of this group, was the creation of an administrative body called the Board to deal with matters affecting the entire Vice Lord nation. Further, regular weekly meetings were instituted with representatives from all the subgroups present. Finally, membership cards were printed with the Vice Lord's insignia, a top hat, cane, and white gloves. Every lord in the nation was required to pay an initial membership fee of $1, have his nickname written on the club's rolls, and carry his card with him at all times. In the fall of 1968, I visited the Lords in their new business office on 16th Street, a few doors west of 16th and Lawndale. There had been numerous changes since I had done my first field work. The club was now legally incorporated and had received a substantial grant from government sources to undertake self-help projects. The group has started a restaurant called Teen Town, begun an employment service, and opened a recreation center named House of Lords. They had entered into agreements with both the Cobras and the Roman Saints, and all three of the clubs had cooperated in community help projects. The Vice Lords were strongly involved in Black Pride and Black Consciousness programs. A staff of both whites and blacks was working in the Vice Lord office on legal problems faced by members of the Lawndale community. In the short time I was there, however, it was impossible for me to get more than a few hints as to the basic changes the club had undergone. There were still various Vice Lord branches, but sections no longer functioned within the Vice Lord city. Everyone I talked with, including friends, who no longer took part in any of the club's activities, said that gang fighting had completely stopped. If this is true, then it is clear to me that the Vice Lord social and cultural systems must have undergone basic and radical changes. The inflow of a large amount of money from government sources, coupled with the complete termination of gang fighting, must have had a profound impact on the group. Unfortunately, I was unable to go into any of this in the few hours of my visit. It will be fascinating to see what happens to the Vice Lords in the future. In this chapter, we have discussed the Vice Lord's origin and subsequent development. While this sketch is only an outline, most of the major developments in the club's growth have been highlighted. In the following chapters, we shall turn from historical developments and look more carefully into the club's social and cultural system as it existed at the time of my field work in 1966. I will use the ethnographic present in my description, meaning that I will employ the present tense, even though the events occurred in the past, during the time I did the field work.